Hello, and welcome back to CBT Skills 101. My name is Hannah, and as you can probably remember, I am your MSW student host for this show. So, just to do a little bit of a recap of some of the things that we discussed last week, because that's kind of the foundation for some of the skills that we're trying to build in our CBT skill toolbox. So a little bit of a recap. Last week we started talking about the CBT triangle. As you can probably remember, there's three basic components that we look at with the triangle, those being our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. We also consider things like our physical sensations in there, but we don't say the CBT square for some reason. It's the CBT triangle. And the other thing that we consider as well is our environment, some of the circumstances that we might find ourselves and how those are impacting our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Another thing that we kind of took away from last week was the major question: what was going through my mind when that happened? And that's based on the premise of CBT, which is that our thoughts really are kind of the driving force between the way that we're thinking, feeling, and acting. So with that in mind, we moved on to our second big component of CBT, and that was looking at our automatic thoughts. Just a quick recap, our automatic thoughts are those things that just pop into our head without a whole lot of conscious recognition. When we have a thought, we don't think about having the thought before we have it. It just kind of pops up. And sometimes those thoughts are not the healthiest. So what we're trying to do is recognize when we have automatic thoughts that may not be the healthiest thoughts, and how to kind of take control of those and analyze them, see how legitimate, how fact they actually are. And in order to do that, I want to introduce our third major skill that we're going to be kind of looking at, and that is analyzing the validity of our thoughts. Basically considering, are our thoughts fact, or are they an interpretation of an event? So the way that I like to do that is to think about putting our thoughts on trial. When we bring something to court, there is a process of looking at the evidence for or against basically the evidence. So when we have a thought, sometimes we can recognize that it may not be 100% fact. So for example, I'm finishing my program at UBC, and I've been applying to jobs trying to secure work for when I go back to Vancouver. I've probably applied to over 30 jobs, and I've heard back from 2. It's been a little bit discouraging. The 2 were quite exciting, but I think about the other 28 that I haven't heard back from. Some of the thoughts that are coming up into my mind are, I'm never going to get a job, I'm not a desirable candidate, and I'm probably just not very good at what I'm doing. These aren't the most helpful thoughts for me right now. So what I want to do is I want to consider the evidence for the thoughts that I'm having. So the evidence that supports the thoughts are that I have done a ton of applying, which is quite a time-consuming process. I've really put myself out there. You kind of feel like you're making yourself a bit vulnerable in this situation. So that's probably feeding into those automatic thoughts that I'm not good enough, I'm never going to get a job. But the evidence for is not very strong. Evidenced against these thoughts are that I have been working since I was 16. I've had a lot of different jobs. I'm 31 now, so that's 15 years of work where I have always managed to secure employment. Another piece of evidence that kind of refutes the idea that I'm not a desirable candidate or a good employee are that I receive positive feedback from my supervisors. In the practicums that I've done, I've also received positive feedback. I always end up getting some sort of a job. So when I start to look at the evidence for and against, it becomes more and more apparent that my interpretation of not getting called back or contacted that's really what it is. It's an interpretation. I'm I'm believing that it might not be, that it could be a result of my lack of skills, but when I look at the evidence, it might be something else. Maybe I'm not qualified enough for this position. And when I start to think about the other alternatives, it gives me some peace of mind. So what I want you to take away from today's CBT Skills 101 is that when we have thoughts, it's really helpful to kind of consider, what is the evidence? Just because I thought it doesn't mean it's true. And when I know that it can kind of have a detrimental effect on the way that I'm thinking, feeling, and behaving, I think that this can be a really helpful process to engage in. So I hope this is something that you'll practice between now and next week when we start to look at more CBT skills together. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.